Today, I'm speaking with a visionary in the world of documentary filmmaking, Joe Litzinger. As a primetime Emmy nominated TV producer, renowned for his work on the 7-time Emmy winning series Life Below Zero, and the creator behind numerous hours of nonfiction television, Joe's impact on the industry is undeniable. Beyond the accolades, Joe emerges not only as a producer, but as a storyteller, committed to presenting unfiltered and authentic narratives on our screens. In our conversation, we uncovered the untold stories of his career, tracing his journey from the early days to the challenges and triumphs of the world of documentaries. Moreover, we'll explore the nuances of Life Below Zero and how Joe's distinctive approach as a documentarian transcends the norms of unscripted television. He shares insights into the creative process, gripping behind the scenes stories, and advice for aspiring filmmakers. Okay, hey Joe, thank you so much, for taking the time to talk with me today. We had a little bit of time offline, which was cool that we have some Jersey Shore stuff in common, which was very cool to hear. Very, very close to home, literally my old home. You have some family ties, which was pretty awesome to hear, before we even got started.
Yeah, indeed. Yes, my wife would be very excited to know that I'm just doing this podcast at all, but then also to hear that the host is from literally her favorite place in the world, which is Avalon and Ventnor and Stone Harbor, New Jersey.
Yeah, exactly. It's just such brings back the memories, of course, and the reason we met through a mutual friend, a friend that worked with you, a person that worked with you, a friend of my wife's that kind of connected us, and I thought that was really cool. When obviously I've heard of your productions, but never like talking to someone behind such a high profile career that you have. Very inspiring to people, right? And for me, I always like to kind of start, where all things began, right? You're in the documentary world, filmmaking, nonfiction, television. Like going back to that, like, was there like a spark or moment that sort of said, for me, I came out, I thought I'd be directing movies by now and you become a PA and all that stuff, right? And life happens. Were you always into this sort of format, or did you kind of fall into it through other means?
Sure. Well, first off, shout out to our mutual friend Adam for setting us up. Hi, Adam, if you're listening.
Oh, he's
When you're
great.
listening. Yeah, so my background is I grew up in Texas, Houston, and went to school in Austin. I knew that I wanted to do something in the creative space. Started out doing advertising. Well, first started out in computer science because I really loved playing with computers, and then realized that to be a computer scientist, you really had to be good at math. No one told me that when I first and programming, and so ended up transferring to advertising, and then they told me that you have to take a very difficult 7 a.m. class. So then I changed my major again to sociology. So I ended up actually getting a degree in sociology, which is actually somewhat relevant to the documentary space. But while I was there, I did everything I can to be in film school adjacent. So although I didn't go to film school, I attended as many film school classes that I could, work with a bunch of the film students, knew that I wanted to move out to Los Angeles to do what, I wasn't quite sure. I moved out here and lived on my friend's couch, or floor actually, for about 6 months, just trying to find any job. People would be like, "Do you want to work?" I'd be like, "Yeah." I'm like, "It's on." I was like, well, "Okay, whatever, I'll take it." And very early on, there was, this newish thing called reality television. There had been, a variety of shows like The Real World and Survivor and those kinds of things, but it hadn't had the resurgence that it is now. But so yeah, I moved out here, ended up trying to figure out, do I want to work in unscripted, or do I want to work in feature scripted? And the difference to me is, at the time, I would work on a film set and it was very compartmentalized. Each department had their own job, right? There was the lighting department and the sound department, and there was no sort of intermingling, and everyone had their specific roles, and it was hard to kind of break in and be able to find jobs that were fulfilling. It was more of a journeyman path where you had to do something for 10 years and then you get to advance. Whereas the jobs that I took that were in reality, they're like, hey, can you hold a camera? I'd be like, maybe, I don't know. But great, you're a cameraman. Like, can you ask questions? I'd be like, yes. And they're like, okay, great, you're a producer. And, so it was like, do I want to be a PA for 10 years on a film, or do I want to be a producer in one day working in reality TV? I found that flexibility, I guess, compelling, and sort of that's how I steered towards unscripted and reality television.
Yeah, it's very similar to me where I worked on a lot of indie shows, and same difference. It's like today you're the boom operator, tomorrow you're, right? Like, hey, can you hold this? Okay, great. Here's your credit. You have like 10 credits at the end, you're changing camera and it's pulling focus. Why not? Right? Like whatever it takes.
Exactly.
So
those are those sort of like, the Wild West, like whatever it takes. Exactly. Like, can you hold a boom? I was like, I think maybe, I don't know, try. Right.
Mine,
exactly.
Unfortunately, was like Atlantic City Boardwalk holding this boom over a crowd of like 40 people. And it was heavy because they kept extending it. And I'm like, oh boy, this could be ugly. But, fortunately, I was able to hold off. But, it puts people, I like that aspect because you kind of, learning on the job is obviously something that you've heard from the beginning of time. But when you do take these very slow approaches, go to film school and do this and do that, it puts you back so much further than just kind of jumping in. I feel not that film school is bad for those who do it, and of course, but getting on there, just getting your hands dirty, I think is more what I'm getting at in terms of the actual learning, for at least in my spot, my part of the filmmaking world that I was in at the time. Getting in there, getting your hands dirty is the best way to get me. Okay, now I get what you're saying. I don't want to do this, or I do want to do that.
That's absolutely the case for me. It was just really like, like you said, I think there's a value to film school and particularly as a place to like learn and grow. But really, the number one thing is just to do it. Like, even if you're doing it terribly, or even if you go somewhere and you're like, whatever, you drop the boom on the 40 people that you were trying to hold it over their heads, but at least you learned, right? And the more you just get out there, the more you learn. That's really the approach that I took, is really took every single possible job that I could take in every single aspect of making television.
Yeah, and that was me too. Coming out here, it's like, oh, do you want to do something? Well, it's deferred payment, and I didn't know. I was like, okay, yeah, like sure, it's deferred,
Yeah.
And it sounds like great. You're like, I'll take the gig, why not? And you're like, oh, I never get paid. Oh, and you're just out here, and you're like, why not? Sounds like good. It sounds like experience, and I'm on a set, and that's all I need to do, so I can start meeting people and figuring it out. But like for you, so you're doing these kind of jobs here and there, like. Is there someone or some project that, that sort of for you was like, okay, now I know I want to be in this world and this is my calling, or you're finding out that it's your calling?
Yeah, I think so. I think, one of the things for those deferred projects, or those projects where you're just, if you can afford to, again, take any job, paid or not, that you are meeting people. People always say like, oh, it's about who you know, but not necessarily like from I didn't know anyone from a family standpoint, but it's really more about like who you meet. And you never know, we're talking about our mutual friend, Adam, who set this up. He was an intern of mine, I don't know, 12 years ago. And once I ended up getting Life Below Zero, he emailed me, took a couple times for him to email me and be like, hey, remember me? And ended up working on the show for 8 years, both in post and in the field. And for me, I just took every possible job, but eventually I met somebody named Elizabeth who ended up being my mentor for 5 years. And, at the time it just started as another production assistant job and another group of people, but met her, we hit it off, and I was a PA and she was I don't know, coordinator, and then she became a production manager, and then she hired me as a coordinator, and then she became a line producer, and then hired me as a production manager. And it was really through her that I got to start to move up a little bit, and through that and such a wide range of projects, I did fall in love with reality television and unscripted television, going from show to show, meeting real people, doing real things, but like, 2 months you could be, I was in a, oil field in Texas, and then Dominican Republic for a couple months, and then in Alaska. It really just being able to go into someone's life, learn about them in such a, intense, quick way, to be able to make something and share their stories. That's really what I fell in love with, was that kind of storytelling.
So, like, speaking of storytelling, right? Like, is there a process for each project when it comes to that subject, right? Like, or maybe a specific criteria you look for, maybe when you're looking for your next project? How does that all sort of come together in how you formulate, okay, this is the process, right, for this project, like a criteria you might put together when you start to choose your next project?
Yeah, I think, initially, particularly after all, I should say growing up, or over the years, one of the most important criteria becomes like, okay, well, can I pay rent? Like that
Number
does
one.
become
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
important. Yes, once you get past that, once you get an ability to start to be even more selective in your work, for me, and it sounds kind of obvious, but it's not. Like, it's just really finding something that's interesting. Almost everything to me is interesting on the surface, but it's a matter of, is this is going to be potentially, in the case of, Life Below Zero, I'm going on 11 years on this show. So when a new project comes along, I look at it at the long term. Is this something that I want in my life every day? I'm not the kind of person, and I don't think this business is the kind of business where you just kind of can clock in and clock out. And so really, I think, to me, the most important criteria, and thinking about what projects I want to do, or people that I want to work with, is what will my life be like? It's like you're getting married almost to something, and it's like finding a partner. It's like, this will be a big part of my life, and do I want that to be a big part of my life?
Right, right. So, and I would imagine, like, obviously locations, you're talking about Texas and Dominican, all these areas throughout the world you're sort of going to. And I would also imagine that a typical day in the life when you're on a production differs. But is there some sort of normalcy, like, once you're in the thick of it, whether you're on set and maybe you're back in post, but what is like a typical day, if there is such a thing, that term, typical day, in your life sort of look like?
It definitely ranges. There's a kind of a, I don't know, Hollywood cliche, but it's like I have various projects in various stages of development, and those projects really dictate my day to day. At the moment, the majority of my focus is, of course, Life Below Zero, and the spin-off shows, and then on the side, it's making documentaries. So it really, which is kind of one of the beauties of working in this business, is that my day to day, although there will be obviously similarities, there will be phone calls, there will be Zooms, there will be meetings, that the content of it will change, particularly, definitely on a year to year basis, sometimes on a month to month basis. Like, one of the most recent projects we just completed was about people who do competitive canoe dancing. It's called interpretive freestyle canoeing, where they'll play music and sort of use the canoe to dance. But at the same time, I'm also, and again, primarily my primary job is working with Alaskans, and specifically, we have a new show about Indigenous Alaskans. So I'm in these worlds, and although I'm having a Zoom with, I don't know, the legal department or creative teams, that the content is so varied between the variety of projects, it keeps me definitely interested. But overall, no, there really is no typical day. It could be, in Alaska one day, following people canoeing the next, or like, hey, I have an idea for a TV show. It's, and then I'm going to go I think like 2 weeks ago, I was in Northwest Oregon, filming somebody who is a cowboy who lives amongst wolves, and then 2 days later in Alaska. So, yeah, I think that's kind of the exciting part. No average day.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's awesome. Like, and your company, right, is called Interesting Human Media, right? So when, looking at these projects, are just, people that sign up for, being part of your productions, right? Like, what do you think for you, like a person's story or a person or their story, what makes that like interesting to you, and how do you sort of like uncover the extraordinary in everyday life?
The number one thing I think I look for, or that I think a lot of people would look for to find something or someone who's interesting, is passion. So it doesn't really matter what they're doing. Are they freestyle canoeing? Are they, I don't know, really into puzzles or trimming trees or building furniture or making their own homebrew? It's just finding someone who's passionate about what they're doing, and hopefully can emote and share that passion, and then that, I think that's the initial spark. But then the next sort of elevated step, at least for me, in terms of figuring out, like, is this a story worth sharing? Figuring out what the emotion is, like when somebody watches whatever the final product will be, will they feel something? Is it I don't know, like excitement or empathy or finding those emotions and an ability to relate and express the human condition are the, to me, the greatest stories. Is so really finding someone who's passionate and finding someone who can elicit emotion from a viewer.
Right. Yeah. That can't be easy either, because you never know like who you're going to meet on these productions. Right. And sometimes they just click and they're a natural. And maybe other times it's like you're trying to pull, pull stuff out of them depending on the scenario. Right. And I think when people think of, unscripted or documentaries, funding comes to mind for me. Right. Because it's not always like, oh, hey, we have this A-list actor, so therefore you get this budget. Here's the marketing budget, and so forth and so on. Obviously, funding could be like a crucial aspect of bringing these projects to life. No pun intended. But when like in your experience raising money, are there like strategies for someone listening might be like, okay, I'd love to get into this world, but I don't know anyone yet, but I want to do my own thing. Are there maybe strategies that you found to be effective when seeking like financial support for projects when you've needed it?
Yeah, funding and fundraising is probably the worst part of filmmaking. I would assume any kind of filmmaking. The documentary world is interesting. Particularly, it's difficult in the U.S. Across the globe, particularly in Canada, places like that, they have funding for non-scripted, particularly documentary worlds and projects. In the U.S., particularly if it's a passion project or a impact documentary, funding is very difficult. I've done across the board in terms of selling something to a streamer ahead of time, which of course is always the gold standard. That happens in about 1 in 50 million projects. Then grant writing, which is a good avenue, except for it takes 5 years, and that becomes really a full-time job. And nowadays, of course, there's Kickstarter and GoFundMe type, and really, I think it's all going to be budget dependent. Like, how much do you think you need to tell this story? Sometimes I think, myself included, or filmmakers will find that they have what they need to tell that story. So do you need $100,000 or $500,000 to tell your short documentary or even your feature? Or is this something that you could make with your iPhone?
Mhm.
Is this something you can make with borrowing cameras? Is this something you can make for really $5,000, $500? I guess that's the biggest piece of advice that I would have for fundraiser people who are interested in fundraising for their project, is truly not like in an ideal world you win the lottery, like great, then I'll make my short film for $5 million. But truly, what do you think it will actually take to make your movie? You can go from there.
So like would the concept be like if you can make it, maybe we'll call it maybe a lean budget, right? Maybe some people say, trim the fat, or terms I've heard over the years. When is that something where you could take that and say, now I can showcase this thing, I only did it for this much, so therefore, does that help you then propel to bigger productions or more access to funds because they see what you can do with so little, for instance?
I think there's some of that. I also think, though, a lot of people, particularly the audience, don't necessarily keep that in mind when they're watching, right? They're just wondering. I think they're feeling something, and it's like, I think you can make them feel something with hundreds of thousands of dollars, or again, just a compelling story. I think there are broadcast standards, of course, that you have to work through. Like if you're trying to do a Netflix or a big streamer, that could be preventative. There's also, can you afford to do this? Do you need the fundraising to pay yourself? Is this a side job, or can you have a full-time job and do this as a hobby? If you need to pay yourself, and this is something that you think is going to take 2 to 3 years, that's, a different story. And again, if you do the fundraising grant side, that's another year of your life where you're spending an entire year trying to raise money when you could have just made it, and I think it's just really a matter of how fast you want to do it. But I do think, again, the most important thing is the story and the emotion. And if you can find ways to capture that, either with, shooting it on a Red or shooting it on an iPhone, that it doesn't really matter. If you have a good story, people will watch it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And some things you can't control. This is my next question would be the situations you're in, like making these films, being a filmmaker, obviously in the conditions you're working under. Oftentimes I would imagine you're in some pretty intense and potentially dangerous situations, right? Like, is there something, like maybe a story of a moment you could share that maybe it was like, okay, this is really not good, this is a very bad situation we're in, like, and how do you like get the team and manage yourselves to get through it, physically and emotionally?
Yeah, it's a great question. On Life Below Zero, and for those listeners who don't know, Life Below Zero is a show that airs on National Geographic, and about people who live in Alaska, subsistence hunters, fishers, people who live off the land, and temperatures could range between -70 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's obviously very extreme conditions. And we've been filming that for 11 years, and we've definitely been in some crazy conditions. Personally, I just go and kind of visit all the locations as the executive producer and the showrunner. I'm not out in the field for the extended period of time like the crews are. I did that kind of stuff prior to running Life Below Zero, but for the teams on Life Below Zero in particular, there definitely been, you've got bears, you've got weather, you've got falling into ice, you've got, whiteout conditions, -70. We're in places where it's so cold you can't, like, lighter fluid won't light.
Ugh.
It's the kind of places, I don't know if you've seen viral videos where you have a steaming cup of coffee and you throw it in the air, and by the time it gets to the ground, it's snow. That you can feel it in your lungs. But I think really the most important thing, and one of the most important things that we do, and Life Below Zero is produced by BBC Studios and National Geographic, and obviously those two corporations take safety very, very important. And then to me as well, as a showrunner, I think about the crews in the field every day, all the time that they're out there, and how to keep them safe. And we're fortunate that we have a very lean team in the field. We have 4 people who go out. There is a producer, a shooter, an assistant camera person, and a safety person. And that person's job is to keep the crew safe. And we are typically filming with experts. These are people who live in Alaska. These are people who, this is their world. It's not like, we take people from the lower 48 and drop them into these conditions and see. But on our show, we have the extreme. We have people who have climbed Everest like a couple times. They're pretty hardy, like, right? They'll cut it out there. And then you have people who've never left Los Angeles. But across the board, I think the most important thing is more mental. You talk about one thing you talk about a lot is the term going bushy. So if you're out there, you're away from your family, you're isolated. We're getting to a time right now in Alaska where it's going to be an hour or no sunlight whatsoever, like literally 24 hours of darkness, negative 50 degrees. You're living with 3 people that you just met in a small tent. The bathroom is a bucket in the corner. And it's really about mental health and finding crew and people who can tolerate and who can be out there. The physical health obviously is of course extremely important, but in terms of qualifications, in terms of background, it's really finding people who can handle the isolation. There have been a variety of extremes, but you could, same way, in terms of the mental aspects of it, like it really all depends on, you could be in a negative 60 situation with bears, or you could be in downtown LA, and what is dangerous is relevant. I think what's important is how you handle it.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously people responded, Life Below Zero's numerous Emmy Awards, viewer favorite. Like, making a show like that, what are sort of, obviously we talked about the challenges, but, what do you feel like the rewards of producing a show that maybe, you're diving deep into the lives of these people that are, in these harsh environments? Like, it sounds like, okay, everything is so intense and obviously cold. What are like the rewards that you get from producing a show like this?
Well, we get money and Emmys.
Yeah.
Those are the most
Two
important.
things are all
Just
here
kidding.
for.
Right. That's what we're all here for, is how you get money. No, of course, getting like I mentioned, getting a paycheck and being able to pay your rent is important. But for me, the biggest reward of Life Below Zero, one, being able to pick the teams that I work with, and then being able to foster growth amongst the crew. We mentioned Adam as an example, but for me, personally, the biggest reward is finding people you like to work with, and uh, helping elevate their careers while you elevate the show, and really being able to make something that is of pretty good quality, entertaining, and then also doing it with great people. Like, I don't know if that sounds cheesy, but it really is the truth. Like, that is the most important reward, is being able to work collaboratively with people you like working with. And I think the more success you get, I guess probably even the more like financial security you have, the more you're able to do that. And I think ultimately it's probably what everyone in the creative field wants to strive for. And it's definitely what I strive for, is just the continued ability to make great projects with great people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that once you can get a crew that, right, you just know these are your people and they're as invested in it as you are, it's a happy marriage between everyone, where you all have the same goal, making great content and obviously enjoying what you do. And I wondered, like with that show specifically, like, does the approach in making this show, does it differ from what people may typically associate with reality television? Like, is there a way you sort of navigate or present these unscripted elements in a way that sets it apart with, shows that people just might be accustomed to just watching on, network TV?
Yeah, sometimes reality is a bad word, like reality TV. People are like, ugh, reality TV.
Yeah.
I think there's a wide range of reality. And I think even the reality TV where people are like, ugh, reality TV, like let's just say, not exactly real reality TV, there's a place for that. It's entertaining for people. But I've been very fortunate to work on shows that are actually unscripted. Life Below Zero airs on National Geographic and is produced by BBC Studios. You talk about National Geographic and you talk about the BBC; those places hold truth and accountability, as gold standards in terms of that. I've been very fortunate that we're in a position to document reality. And, every time you do anything, they talk about the bystander effect or the just being watched is going to maybe change how you react. So what is this is a topic we could probably talk about for hours, which is like, well, what is truth? Like, if you add music to something, is it if you if obviously if you say this or here are your lines. But again, the beauty of Life Below Zero in particular is that the people we film are living authentic lives. They are literally in extreme environments. You can't cue weather or animals. It just happens. And it's really following their stories that hopefully, you're lucky, and as we've been, that you're following. You don't need to add drama. You don't need to make up anything, because the story in itself is naturally engaging and interesting.
Yeah, because there are, obviously, we've all seen the scripted reality shows, right? Where,
Of course.
right, it's just very sitcom in a way. But obviously, what you're doing, like you said, and even just reading stuff online, if you just Google, Life Below Zero, you're seeing these people just recently going through major life events that it's just all, like you said, it's just all truth, right? So when you're sort of producing a show, and I think, I may be wrong, there's a fine line between being an observer, like I am, but also like you are with these people, but also getting emotionally involved with these same people. Is there like a balance between staying objective and empathetic in the storytelling of this production?
That's a great question. I can speak to Life Below Zero, but also just speak to making documentaries as a whole. You of course want to have as much empathy as you can with your subjects. And I think having that empathy and relating helps you tell a good story, but also you are there to document, and I think finding that balance between becoming friendly and becoming friends with the subjects is a delicate tightrope, because ultimately, you are making a product, even a completely truthful product, but that trust needs to be there. Otherwise, particularly when you're not making stuff up, you need them to open up and you need them to share. And it's really just finding that balance and finding that trust. You ultimately trust them, and they ultimately trust you. And I know this sounds like obvious, but we are in Hollywood. The key is don't break that trust. Mm-hmm. The more you trust your subjects, and the more they trust you, the more open they'll be. And of course, the more open somebody is, the more emotion you'll be able to get, the more meaning, the more connection you'll be able to get. But I do think the relationship between documentarian and subject is definitely a learned skill, but also just a human skill.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, these people, I think first and foremost, like you said, the trust factor, it has to be fundamental, obviously, especially for a show like we're discussing that's been on 11 seasons, right? You want to make sure that trust level is there, of course. And I think documentaries also, at least in my mind, they kind of push the boundaries, of storytelling, and not just, Life Below Zero, but any project, say, that you were involved with. Like, was there ever something where you just like, maybe it's the canoe, the canoe show you have coming up, where you're sort of taking a creative risk in your storytelling, and if it's in the past, how did it pay off, or just what do you think that one of the biggest risks you've taken in your productions has been?
Yeah, I think there was an interesting answer in the canoe project. We set out, the project started, a little quick backstory is the project started with a viral video of a guy canoeing to Lady in Red. It went viral, and it was on Colbert, kind of made fun of him, and it was on a couple top shows, and that was sort of my initial like, oh, this looks really interesting. Like there are these people who, play music and sometimes dress up in costumes, but they're in paddling in canoes and dancing to music. Like, what is this? And it sounds like a really interesting group of people, and never set out with an intention, of course, to exploit or make fun of, but really just as an intention to explore what I think most people would say, like, oh, this is an interesting group of passionate people doing something unique. And that was the initial documentary, was just kind of a fun exploration of a unique subculture, and that's how we started. But early on, while we were filming, there was maybe about 10 different canoeists who sort of are the stars, I guess, of this world. This couple, they were on their way to an event, and it's a terrible tragedy. While they were driving out there, somebody swerved over into their lane, and unfortunately, someone's wife died, and her husband, who we were not filming at that moment, but we just talked to her the day before. Her husband was hospitalized, with a variety of broken ribs, and talking about potentially maybe he might not walk, or at least definitely not be able to canoe for a while. His wife passed away, and it was at that moment, it was like, well, what, of course, feeling extremely sad and tragic, and thinking like, well, this documentary is over, right? Like there's nothing, we're not going to follow this lighthearted comedy with this. And when we thought about it, and after talking to the people in the community, including the person who ended up becoming our main subject, he was like, my wife really would have wanted you to continue making this. And we ended up, this is that moment you're saying, like making a creative choice that could have gone any way. We completely changed the documentary to, instead of being a lighthearted documentary on people who canoe, it ended up being a documentary on loss and recovery and community. And we ended up following the subject, Bob's recovery, over 6 to 7 months, and his dealing with the loss of his wife, and him trying to, eventually get back into the canoe. Definitely was, a creative choice, and one, of course, we wouldn't have been able to do without the encouragement of Bob and the community. But that was a drastic turn and a drastic creative choice, of course, and also obviously a terrible tragedy. But it really was just sticking with the story. And ultimately, I think what we have is, again, I'm in no way discounting the tragic actual story that occurred, but in terms of documentary, what a rare opportunity to, be able to document someone's journey of loss, and then their own simultaneous recovery, and the impact that loss had on a subgenre, that, it's that subculture of people, and how the community came together. So I think that documentary probably is the greatest example of a very drastic and tragic, for lack of a better term, creative choice.
Right, yeah, and you would think, hopefully, obviously, it's hard to imagine, obviously, whatever Bob had gone through at the time, but hopefully this provided some sort of, cathartic, just something to help him cope with what he was going through, and maybe this was able to, be a small part of his recovery, like you said.
I think it was, and I think he really appreciated us. We kept asking over and over, and we never obviously pushed him in terms of like being out there, but like, is this okay? And really, I think the two things that ended up being great for us as filmmakers, and also going back to your question about like how close do you get to the subject, we obviously got very close to Bob, particularly my co-director Mia, who would go out there a lot and interview him. But really, what we ultimately ended up making was also a tribute to Elaine. Elaine is his wife, who passed away, and this she was our initial contact, and she was the person we spoke to, and she was the one who wanted to bring this documentary, to shine a light on this, about this thing that she was the most passionate person, one of the most passionate people we've ever met, but particularly about canoeing. And it was something she cared a great deal about. And this documentary, I think, is a testament and a tribute to her passion. We're currently touring a couple of small festivals and stuff. And I think the next big step is going to show the community. The community hasn't even seen it yet. And very excited, a little nervous, but very excited to get everyone's response to it.
Yeah, and just documentaries in general, right? Like they've clearly, evolved over the years, taking like the role of documentaries, unscripted programming, and like the landscape of today's media. Do you see any certain or small or large, trends or changes that maybe to you find the most interesting, of like, hey, this excites me a lot about this that we didn't maybe have 15 years ago?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a couple things in there. One is access. And you talk about your early question about fundraising and stuff. 10, 20, definitely 30 years ago, I mean, the barrier to entry to make your own doc, I mean, you needed film, you needed to process that film, you needed sound, and now all of that is on your iPhone. I think one of the more exciting advancements is that barrier to entry to actually be able to film something and edit it and getting it out there. Of course, obviously, there's now a lot more distribution models out there. Even if you did somehow afford the film and afford the the sound guy, person, and the crew to be able to make your documentary, there was like 3 places that it could go. Now there are hundreds, and I think so. That's one of the things I think is most exciting, is that there is such a small barrier to entry to making documentaries. Along those lines, I think it can't be ignored, the social media landscape, particularly in terms of TikTok and in terms of YouTube Shorts. I watch a lot of YouTube Shorts, and I see some of them. They get, I don't know, 70 million views. My show gets 2 million views, and it's like, it's just incredible, the amount of resources that a lot of these explainer videos or whatever amount of views that they get, and of course I think that is the future. Will there be a place for sort of traditional linear nonfiction series in the future? I actually don't know. I'm minimally using TikTok as a way to learn what the young people are are watching. But what's pretty amazing is it's very easy to I sound like an old person, whatever, but very easy to watch hours and hours of content, and a lot of that content, it took people, whatever, almost no money to make, but the algorithm shows you exactly what you want to see. You can change your mind within that, be like, oh, I don't know, I want to watch. I ended up watching a lot of people build Legos, for example, a variety of different Lego. I have 2 kids, and so of course the Lego world interests me. But I guess to say, thinking of the future, it's really about how people will watch content, and I don't know. I mean, obviously, I think YouTube Shorts and TikTok, or whatever form of that becomes, will be around. And the question, is there still a place for traditional cable, and is there still a place for the traditional cable budgets? I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Right. Yeah. And you do, you see these kids make these, I mean, kids, adults, I mean, there's obviously all ages on these platforms, especially YouTube's been around for a long time, but Shorts, like you said, specifically, you just need an iPhone or Android or whatever and go out and do it. And editing programs, everything can be free and accessible, and you just make it happen. And it's pretty cool to see, like you said, 70 million views on something that maybe took, just one person to do.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And then even, there's a scale for those videos, of course, right? There's someone who's just, whatever, recording a small, I don't know, TikTok dance, and that took them 5 minutes. But there are some YouTube Shorts that I see have an incredible amount of production value, that you can see that they took their time to make this. It's just shot beautifully, edited well. The music, the color correction, and the cameras that are being used really are competing with broadcast quality, but for, not just a fraction of the price, but like a real fraction, like a fraction of what it takes to make a traditional 30-minute to an hour show. That, it used to be that these shorts or whatever, it's like, oh, okay, well, it's just people creating, I don't want to say cheap content, but
Budget,
not with a lot of production budget, without a whole lot of, production value. But I watch some YouTube shorts, some TikTok, some short form documentaries that are better than, some of the Netflix documentaries that I watch. Even like recently I ended up watching a short documentary about Fortnite, which I know nothing about. I don't know anything about video games, but it was about, the title was, "Can you be a pacifist in Fortnite?" And it was a 30-minute documentary. And I'm like, did I just spend 30 minutes watching an explainer video about that? And I did, and it was amazing. And so I don't know. I think, it's really the probably the future is in, the ability to, I guess, democratize content making. And then the next step is doing the same in terms of distribution.
Yeah.
Probably like podcasting, I would assume.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I think you brought something up earlier. You mentioned festivals, right? Like you've done panels, you've mentored at South by Southwest and other. So like, if you're giving someone advice, obviously you talked about the short form content, right? To the next generation of these unscripted or documentary filmmakers, like what advice, kind of, coming off of your question, your response to short form content and social media, like what advice would you give someone that's like sort of aspiring to follow in your footsteps to follow?
It's really interesting because sometimes I'll be working at these, I'll be at an event as a documentary mentor, and somebody will be asking me advice, and I'll later go watch their content. And I'm like, I should be asking you for advice. I just watched your 30-minute video on Fortnite or whatever you just made, and you got 70 million views. My show gets whatever, 1 million views. But I do think it does all go back to really just finding the story, and then finding, obviously, the means to tell it. There seems to be really two paths at the moment, at least. There's the traditional path of finding, kind of like I outlined in the beginning of this podcast, is finding your way into more of a work for company kind of, or companies, gigs, and the other, path being just doing it on your own. There's a lot of people, most of the people, particularly the young people, again, because I'm so old, the young people who work with me are doing their own projects. Again, I mean, what does it take now? You can either rent or buy pretty great gear. It's a very small barrier to entry, but you still do have something great about, what they call cable or broadcast, in that there is a centralized place that people go to, that change from networks to Netflix to, YouTube shorts. But really, I guess the advice that I would give in terms of people who are specifically looking to make content versus people who are looking to break into the business to find a job. If they're like, I have this thing that I want to tell, my advice is then tell it. Like, even if you're going to make the whole thing up again, and not make it up, but redo the documentary again, get an iPhone or use your iPhone, or buy a used iPhone, borrow some friend's iPhone if you don't have an iPhone, and do a sit down interview. And it's really just, learning, as we talked about, on the job. If someone's asking me how to break into the business and find more of a steady gig and pay their rent and pay bills, I think that's a different advice. And the short version of that advice is really, again, sort of the path that sounds like you took, and the path that I take is as much as you can afford to take as many opportunities as you can take, regardless of the job, because eventually it's really those people who are going to hire you, and it's finding the right people and working with them. One, of course, is the advice, and then also ultimately, as we talked about, the dream, finding great people and finding, a great story to tell.
Well, okay. So speaking of stories, right? Like I read, I saw that you're big into adventure. You like the outdoors. Are there stories that you have that you want to bring to light in the future as a filmmaker, as a storyteller that, maybe they're kicking around in your head, but hey, one day I want to do a show about this.
I'd say be fortunate slash unfortunate as I have like 100 of those. And every conversation I have once, I think even our conversation offline earlier about like the Jersey Shore, and, you're talking about how, live that there's two different
Mhm.
seasons when you live out there, right? Obviously, it's something that you would know a lot more about, but there's the summer season when all the tourists come, and then there's the winter. It's like, oh, I don't know, there's probably a pretty amazing documentary or even TV show. Well, obviously not the Jersey Shore TV show, but what that's like to live in a seasonal place where everything revolves around the summer and how these towns survive. But anyways, yes is the answer to that question. There are a lot of projects, and it's really just one of the things that I guess I've learned about myself, finding what sticks. So it's really finding the ideas that again are interesting. Everything sounds interesting again,
Yeah.
initially, and then it's just trying to figure out like, okay, was that just is there a story there that's a Wikipedia story, right? Like this thing happened and this thing happened and this thing happened and this thing happened, or this is how Atlantic City was born. This happened, this happened. But is there emotion in there? Is there something that more people will find interesting? And it's just finding those topics. But yes, I have quite a few that have been floating around, and it's just really finding the right space and the right time for them to float to the surface.
Yeah, get the free time to flesh them out, right?
Free time is key. Obviously, like, as I mentioned, Life Below Zero is my full time job. I make documentaries on the side, and I also, I have a family. I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and it's really finding the free time to make everything. There's just not enough time to tell all the incredible stories.
Exactly. So people who want to learn more about you and your story or your company, Interesting Human Media, where would be the best place for people to, follow or connect with you or just learn more about you?
Sure. Well, I guess probably Google
Yeah.
me. I don't know, but also interestinghumanmedia.com. Well, you can learn about the production company. As far as Life Below Zero, we air on National Geographic. We currently are airing new episodes on Tuesday, and depending upon when this podcast comes out, our newest show, Life Below Zero: First Alaskans, will also be airing, and that's a show dedicated exclusively to Indigenous stories in Alaska.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome, man. I really appreciate your time learning a lot about you. I'm glad Adam connected us because this has been like just easy to talk with you. And, you're very personable, just a great story and just persevering, learning on the go, not being afraid to take on opportunities and making your own path, I think is what people can take away with this. So I do, thank you again for your time today. And I really just had a blast talking with you.
Well, same and likewise. And thanks again to Adam, and thank you for considering me for this podcast. I listened, of course, before going on this to a variety of them, and really enjoy the variety of people you interview, and talk about what's interesting. You must also be in the same way. You get the ability to sit down with such a wide range of interesting people. Yeah, anyways, really enjoy your podcast.
Thank you, man. So we will we'll meet up in person soon. But again, thanks for your time today, Joe. And everyone, go check out Joe's website and see where you can, check all the cool projects he has going on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Experience Curve. Please take the time to share this podcast with a friend or colleague to help get the word out about my show.